Okay, everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the Louisville Metasploit class, as taught by Dave Relic Kennedy, Martin Purehate Boss, Elliot Nullthreat Cutright, Ken Powercycle, some of the last name, and Adrian Irongeek Crenshaw. First of all, I'd like to do a few thank yous, and I'm actually have Brian come up here to do one of the thank yous. First of all, to the ISSA officers for helping get all this organized, to the speakers, of course, who I just covered, Dave, Martin, Elliot, and Powercycle. For Tipping Point and the ISSA chapter for sponsoring lunch for us and the venue. We had a problem with the registration system. Future registration systems, I'm gonna come up with some way of handling that better. Probably a web form where you have to register. Of course, HD Moore for Metasploit, and also I believe we have those beta licenses.
Still working on that.
Still, all right. We may have an announcement later on about some extra perks for being here. Of course, the Metasploit Unleashed Offensive Security Team for creating the Metasploit Unleashed documentation, which, if you haven't seen it, is pretty much the best documentation out there on how to use Metasploit. Metasploit is an awesome package, but it's such a moving target that documenting it is hard, and the Metasploit team themselves have not done as much documentation as some of us might like. Luckily, other people like Dave Kennedy of the Metasploit Unleashed team have started adding on to it and done great work that way. And of course, also Johnny Long for his charity work. Hopefully everybody got that donation in. And a bunch of others who I'm forgetting. At this point, I'm going to call Brian up to say a couple of words.
Just a quick note, as Adrian mentioned, Tipping Point sponsored a major portion of the lunch and everything here. And I want to say that their people weren't able to make it today. The sales guy that was going to come just say a couple of words had a death in the family. And what I'd like to do is, since he's not going to be here to even introduce himself, he'd like to have something to get back to his marketing department. I'm going to pass around. It's totally voluntary. It's separate than the sign-in. But if you would put an email address on here, just so we can give them something back. Really appreciate Tipping Point. They have been very supportive of the InfoSec community. Not only this, but the InfoSec conference, Daycon in Dayton. They do a lot for the InfoSec community. That's it. Thank you.
All right. And if anybody's Twittering this event, this is the tag we decided to use thanks to Ben. And beyond that, question, where's Martin at?
Here.
Martin, tell us about the network layout for what people can connect to.
Johnny, come up there?
Sure.
Oh. Anyway, there's 3 access points that you can connect to. In case you didn't notice, they're all called hostile. 1, 2, and 3. We did that so hopefully no hotel guests will connect to those. And I'm going to go over here and get the 3 IPs that are our target VMs, and we'll post those in just a second. I didn't realize I was going to put those up there, but hold on one second.
You go ahead and go over there and scream them out.
All right.
Now, hopefully, did everybody get one of these little sheets? These are essentially the notes of the exercise I'm going to run through when I start covering my part of Metasploit. If you didn't get one, I think we have a bunch at the front desk still.
So, if people want to write these down, the XPVM is .128. The Ubuntu 704 VMs .99.
Because the laptop's on the internet. Is there a way to get backtrack just to go through the virtual machines and use the network target?
And there's a surprise VM at 169.
Oh, okay. So
The surprise VM.
I want 18 gaming. 169.
Make sure that the VM itself also has a network card configured. In other words, go into the settings of the hardware and make sure it has a network card. And it knows it's supposed to have network cards.
I'll double check that. I did.
If you have USB support, I can give you a wireless dongle and it might be able to get you connected straight.
Well, the wireless card's looking great. Like
Well, I'm saying a wireless dongle that you can tell is a device to backtrack for itself.
Let's see, I'm going to try that. Well, we still have to talk about the Android.
Okay, did we get all those read off?
Try 2 or 3.
Alright, luckily I don't have to use no wireless network for mine. Thanks for setting all that up, by the way, Martin. And also thanks to the Metasploit crew for letting us borrow their VMs that they already had set up. It saved us some time. So, with no further ado, a little bit about me. My name's Aidan Crenshaw. I run a website called Irongeek.com. Any of you been there? Thank you much. Imagine you haven't been there to actually find out the information for this event. I'm also a member of the ISD InfoSec Daily podcast. Check it out. They do a podcast 5 times a week. I'm usually on only once a week, though. I have an interest in InfoSec education. I don't know everything. I'm just a geek with extra time on my hands. It's possible I might tell you something completely wrong. Luckily, my fellow instructors are sure to correct me if I mistake anything. First of all, first thing I want to talk about is what is Metasploit. I'm assuming you know roughly what Metasploit is because you're in this class. But first, it's an exploitation framework. Essentially, it's a set of tools, code, and so forth that makes it easier to develop exploits and do exploitation and do pen testing in general. The current version is all written in Ruby. My understanding it's the world's largest Ruby project and probably has more source code in Metasploit than in the Ruby compiler itself, or Ruby interpreter itself, pardon me. Includes all sorts of things. Exploits, for instance, payloads, auxiliaries, which I'll cover a little bit here shortly, and I think, who's covering most of our auxiliaries? Ken? Okay. Automated tools and a lot more. As far as automation tools is concerned, we have the king of automation tools from Metasploit here in the class today, Dave Kennedy. Alright, some terminology, just in case you don't know it already, though I imagine most of these things are going to be self-evident. First of all, an exploit. Basically a vector for getting into a system, whether it be a vulnerability or just a bad config. I suppose in a fashion, one of the exploits you can choose, for instance, in Metasploit is the PS exec execute. It's not really an exploit in the sense it's a vulnerability, but if someone has a weak password, I suppose you could see it as an exploit. Regardless, I'm only using it in some parts because as long as the system has its administrative shares open, I know it'll work. The problem with exploits is you'll have mixed results on whether that one will work, and sometimes you have to try them more than once to actually get it to work. Sometimes you have to slightly modify the exploit to actually get it to function properly in a given environment. Like the time Dave Kennedy hacked my box at Louisville.
Sorry about that, dude.
Yeah. Before finding out what scope was.
The whole thing was in scope.
It's okay, we still love you, Dave. Alright. Payload. Payload is essentially what you want the exploit to do in the parlance of Metasploit. This could be your shell code. Basically, what's going to get injected by the exploit and tell it to do something. This could be something like add an account, shovel a shell back to me, start a VNC session, or probably the coolest payload, Interpreter, which basically gives you a little, I guess, remote access tool on the box to do all sorts of things. I'm going to show a little bit of that, and I think Mark is going to go into more depth. You also have encoders. Antivirus packages will detect most stuff in Metasploit. Well, if not obfuscated in some ways, it should hopefully detect most stuff in Metasploit. The way encoders work is they change the code around enough to where, and mangle it enough to where antivirus packages like Symantec hopefully won't necessarily detect it. And there's also two encoders that come with Metasploit. The one that's probably most famous is Shikata Ganai, which is, as my understanding, is a Japanese term for nothing can be done about it. And I've had pretty good results with it. Also, auxiliaries are all sorts of other little fun apps built into Metasploit. We're talking about things like sniffers and scanners, denial of service attacks, just a ton of different tools. Okay, I'm also going to talk a little bit about payloads. By the way, all this definitional stuff is so that it makes more sense when I actually get to the demonstration. First, there's inline payloads. Basically, with these payloads, once the exploit is ran, the entire payload, including the shell code and everything, gets sent. The problem is it makes it a little bit bigger to send, but they are more stable. Another way of doing things is staged. Essentially, the exploit code that's sent, the shell code that's sent, isn't everything that you want the box to do. It's essentially just a stager that once it gets ran on the box, it goes back to the box you're attacking from and grabs all the other stuff it needs to run the payload. Can I explain that correctly? Roughly? Reverse. If you see something in an exploit that says it's a reverse something, generally what that means is it reverses the connection back out to you. For instance, a lot of payloads, you might do say a shell connection where you connect to them. You send them the SYN packet in the three-way handshake. The problem with this is a lot of people's firewalls are going to block incoming SYNs to things they don't recognize. However, outgoing SYNs they might accept. Generally speaking, people configure the egress filtering on a firewall to be much weaker than the ingress filtering. So by doing this, you can essentially have the box that got exploited shovel shell back out to you because it's making the connection out. And this will blow through things like NAT. For instance, let's say there was a web vulnerability and I'm hosting this thing on my website at my house behind a NAT box. Well, I can use the web vulnerability to put the exploit in, and then, even though it's behind NAT, because I'm doing a reverse connection, it's coming back to me. And it can blow right through NAT and I can get my connection, which is nice. You also see some exploits that have no NX. Essentially, these have ways of working around DEP, data execution prevention. Things that basically mark spots in memory as non-execute, so buffer overflows hopefully will not work. Well, there's other ways around that, which the no NX payloads try to find ways around. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with Metasploit. So this is a very brief overview. This is the general flow chart, if you will. You set an exploit, you set a payload, you set a target and the associated options, then you pop a box. Trademark, Dave Relic Kennedy. You're never going to live that one down. Hopefully sometime you might live down Psychomaniac. Guess there will be a lot of in-jokes during my presentation. It's more than that. That's one thing you can do. There's all sorts of other things you can do with Metasploit. But this is the common things that you just want to throw an exploit in a box and see what sticks. Okay. There's several different ways to interface with the Metasploit framework. First of all is MSFConsole. That's the main one I'm going to be focusing on. It's very well supported. As a matter of fact, some things you only really seem to be able to set it in MSFConsole. There's MSF, but it's not as easy to use as, let's say, the MSF GUI, which I totally misspelled there, typo, and MSF Web. There's also the MSF client, a CLI, the command line interface. The nice thing about this is you can throw all your options into the command line, so if you want to script it, there's your thing right there. MSF Web is probably about the prettiest interface. The nice thing I like about it is it's easy to read the descriptions for what you're about to do, what exploits you're choosing, what payloads you're choosing. Unfortunately, it's also slower and not quite as well supported as MSFConsole. And finally, there's also MSF GUI. Very pretty interface, but my understanding it's no longer being maintained. Have they changed anything in that?
No, it's not maintained. Neither is really the web interface.
Either the web's going out too.
Web's going out too?
And the newest one, it works again now. The newest one, the GUI works.
It's going out in 3.4.
Bummer. Are they going to replace it with any other? There's no
console and CLI as far as I understand.
Okay.
And Metasploit Express is going to take place of the GUI type stuff.
Cool beans. You're talking a little bit about that, right? Okay, cool. I'm more basically focused on MSF Web and MSF Console for my presentation. A few basic MSF Console commands. And by the way, all the commands I'll be using, I got the sheet here you can follow along. And the reason I need the sheet is sometimes I forget what I'm typing in too. Anyway, help, of course. Oh, anything you can run from the command line, you can run from inside of MSFConsole. For instance, if you have it running on a Linux box, type in ifconfig, and the configuration of your network card will come up. But besides that, MSFConsole has its own commands like help, which obviously brings you help. If you can type help and the name of some other command, find more information on that particular command. There's search, for instance, you know part of the name of an exploit, but not all of it. You can use search to find it. There's set, which allows you to set parameters. There's set G, which is set global. So let's say you're hacking one particular box, and you want to keep those same settings for every other box you connect to. Or actually, let's say you're hacking one box, but you want to try different exploits. But using setg, you can set things like the target and the local host to connect back on, and have that persistent amongst trying different exploits. With just set, it's only for that one particular connection session. Does that make sense? So basically, if you want to use the same settings for a bunch of different exploits, use setg for set global. There's also unset and so forth, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's show, which basically shows you what options you need to set, or show advance, which will show you advanced options you can set. Exploit and run, essentially just tell it, okay, go ahead and fire off this exploit, let's see what happens. You can do session-L to bring up sessions. So I think just sessions anything, sessions and nothing brings up what sessions are currently active. With the MSFConsole, essentially you can have multiple sessions for different boxes you've attacked, and change between them as you need to. If you want to connect to a particular session, it's session-I1.
You can also do sessions-L-V, and it'll actually show the vulnerability that it was used to exploit.
Oh, that's nice to know. Alright, that is in our slides, so now it's demo time. And hopefully, if anybody wants to try this, try it on the IPs, the XP IP that Martin gave out earlier. It may or may not work. Now, I'm going to do a few steps that you're not going to have to do. I'm running my VMs locally, just so that I hopefully will have a little more reliability. The password for the IndySec image here is just password. And the reason I'm bringing that up, I just need to find this IP address. I could scan for it just as easily, but I'm not going to. Let's see what we got. Okay, apparently 184, 130. So now I'm going to switch to my backtrack. Alright, first I got to log in with root and root backwards, Tor. That gets me logged in, and I'm going to start up X. The only reason I really need X at this point is just to make some things more convenient as far as having multiple windows up. Yeah, I guess I could alt between different consoles, but this is just going to make life a little bit easier and make scrolling easier. How many Linux users do we have? Okay, how many people are using MSF from Windows? Just you, okay. What? Infidel. Alright, if you're using Backtrack 4, next step you're going to have to do is go ahead and actually get your networking interface up. So to do that, I'm going to go to Etsy, init d, networking, and tell it to start up. And actually, I want to borrow one of these. Alright, after that, I'm going to do an ifconfig to find out what my IP address is. Now, this is mine, not yours. You all won't be able to connect to it because, in theory, this is our own little standard, own netted off network on this particular machine's VMware. And so that I have it, I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to here. Alright, now that I've gone that far, and I'm running everything in VMware sessions just to make life easy for me, but this is just easy to be two different boxes. A few of the commands I want to cover, MSF update. This is basically going to go out to the Metasploit servers and pull down the latest exploits, the latest version of Interpreter, all these different packages. You do want to do this from time to time because it's a constantly moving target. They're constantly adding new features to the Metasploit framework. But I'm not going to do that right now because I'm not connected to the internet here. And besides, it would take a little too long, especially if all of us did it. So avoid doing that. But I just want you all to know the commands there. I also mentioned briefly MSF client. I'm going to put it into less so that I can have it come by one page at a time. Did I do that wrong? By the way, Dave, Martin, Elliot, and Ken, do you know inside of MSFConsole if there's a way of doing something like less or more commands?
No, there is not.
That would be a lovely feature to request.
I actually asked for that after you emailed me yesterday. I asked Egypt.
Now, it's taken a while to load up the module tree. Eventually, though, it's going to give me a list of options of things I can do. MSF client, like I said, if you want to script stuff, that'd be the thing to look into. I'm going to hit Q to quit out of that. And I would show up MSF GUI, but it doesn't seem to work in the version of Backtrack 4 I have. But since it's going away anyway, no point even showing it. I'll go ahead and bring up MSF Web. By the way, for those who are not familiar with Linux or Unix in general, Bash shell, tab completion works on here. So if you hit tab, it should try to complete the words you're typing in based on what path it is. I'll go ahead and put an and symbol into that just so it runs and then returns me to the shell. And here shortly, I should hopefully have a web server listening on localhost 55555 and be able to configure some things in Metasploit. Let's see if that's actually up. Now, the way this is configured off Backtrack 4, only the local host can connect to this. Other people outside can't connect into this particular website. That's very good from a security standpoint. Oh, by the way, those who are wondering why you had to start networking yourself, it's generally a good call from a standpoint of not being detected, not to have your network card automatically connect to the network. You may want to change things like, well, your MAC address if you're really paranoid, or make other little network settings, or change what services are listening before you connect. So that's why you have to manually tell Backtrack 4 to connect to the network. That is basically the reason why they did it that way, right, Martin?
Correct.
By the way, if anybody doesn't know Martin, Martin is one of the core Backtrack 4 development team. Alright, we got the web interface up. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into exploits and look for an exploit. Now, Movix of Hack5 fame, and I actually have this link at the end of my notes here, suggested using PSEXEC as an exploit to use. The reason is it's not an exploit in the sense of a vulnerability, but if you know the password and username on a box, you can just type that in, and essentially it uses the administrative services to start a process up. The reason I'm using it here is it's very reliable, and as long as you know a password for it, it'll work. Yes?
One thing that's interesting in PSSec too is it also does pass the hash. So when you extract the hash values off of it, you don't even need to crack the password. You can just take those hash values, pop it into the password.
Yeah, I'll let him explain that a little bit.
Sure.
I'm going to show that.
You can show it? Yeah, so like when we go through Metasploit Express a little bit, you'll actually see that like when you compromise the system, you get the hash values off of it. Then you can just scan through the entire network, and then every single hash value that password associates to, you can compromise like hundreds of machines if you needed to if you had the same password.
Yeah, because most people, local admins, when I had the same password duplicated across the entire, a whole bunch of systems because they're basically an open image. Yeah. I know that's in the way places that I've been. Question though, does it matter what NTLM version you're using?
If you're using NTLM version 2, it doesn't work, but if it's, say for example, if it's a 17-character password and it doesn't have an LM hash, it'll still work. It just doesn't pass the hash for LM or NTLM. It doesn't matter.
Okay, but if you said NTLM 2 only.
NTLM version 2 I doubt would work. It might though.
Alright.
I've tried.
Well, I have up PS Execute. This came up. I'm going to click there. And hopefully in a second I'll be able to set me some options. Sometimes it'll ask you what target. For instance, it might say Windows 2000, Windows XP. There's slightly different return addresses, and it's my understanding between different Windows releases and different service packs. So I think that's more Elliot's thing coming up shortly. I'm giving you little previews of really nice stuff. Alright. Now I'm to the point where I have to choose a payload. And there's a bunch of payloads I could choose. But let's choose one that would be good to show execs. The main reason I'm showing off the MSF Web one is if you show an exec how easy it is to compromise the box via MSFConsole, they may not buy it because it looks complicated. The web interface is much prettier, much easier to understand, and if I show them I have an interpreter session, that's not as impressive to an exec, even though it's far more useful than me getting the remote GUI. So we're going to attempt to get the remote GUI. I'm going to do a real quick search. Oh, by the way, one thing I may not have noted here is in Backtrack 4, at least I think I had it on here before, if you have NoScript enabled, you may have disabled NoScript to get the MSF web interface to work properly. So let me go ahead and find something. The particular exploit I want to find, and this time I'm using the find built in to Firefox. I want to find one called, where did I find it? VNC inject. There's a couple different versions of VNC inject. The one I want to use is the one that essentially reverses the connection back to me. And did I go past it? Oh, actually, I'm not even anywhere near it. Alright. That's bind TCP. There it is. Or that's the HTTP one. That one tries to hide the traffic as web traffic. I know it's in here eventually. There's a lot of different payloads. There, you can see I've already selected it before. Alright. I set that, and now I just have to set up a few options. First of all, my remote host, which I wrote down earlier. In my case, it's 192.168.184.129. Actually, sorry, 130. For my password, I know it's password. Yes, I know it's incredibly weak. Luckily, hopefully, these boxes out there are only meant to be hacked. Let me see. Oh, for account, I'm not going to use administrator. We're going to use Metasploit. And for local host, this is basically the host I'm trying to tell it to connect back to. Remember, I'm using a reverse session. So it's going to try to connect back to me. So if it was like behind a NAT box, it'd have an easier time getting back out. Or any firewall with weak egress filtering. So I'm going to tell it to connect back to me at my local host. Well, not my local host as in my loopback address, but the IP address that Metasploit is actually running from, which in this case is 192.168.184.129. And if I put all that right, let me go ahead and, there's various advanced options I can set, which I'm not going to go into as of right now, but you can bounce things through proxies and so forth. Take a look at those later on. I'm going to launch the exploit, and hopefully I won't have to launch more than once to actually get it to work. Let's see what happens. For some reason it brings up my console. By the way, the confusing thing about the console when it comes up in the web interface, you may think you can start typing any place. You have to click down here to get it to work. You type exploit, and hopefully it does its thing. Hopefully it's also bringing up.
You got a session.
Was that?
You got a session.
Cool. I'm going to go to my. And I see a little courtesy console came up right there for me. But I'm going to switch back to my Backtrack 4 box. And you see I now have a VNC session where I can control the box. This isn't actually as useful as having an interpreter on the box, but it's more flashy to show someone. Alright, I've done that. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of all of this. And I'm now going to move on to instead using MSFConsole. Now we're going to be using these stuff throughout the day. I'm basically covering the very intro. I'm sort of a noob when it comes to Metasploit, and hopefully all the other instructors will cover for the things that I'm lacking in. Alright, we're going to start with MSFConsole, and it's probably going to take a bit to iterate through all the modules it has. Okay, now that that's up, I'm going to do a few little odds and ends. I could type ifconfig right here. This is just to show you that anything you can execute at the command line, you can pretty much execute inside of MSFConsole. There's my IP address, which we've already covered before. This is just to show you there's some other command you run around, like let's say nmap or whatnot, you should be able to. The next thing I want to do is bring up help. And unfortunately, right here, we got the scroll. In 3.4, I'd really love to have a less option. That would be so cool. Ken said he had a way around this, so Ken, maybe if you can show that later. He said he had some kind of screen solution that was supposed to allow you to see it one page at a time. Okay. Show me that later, man. I'd be interested. because it would really help my workflow with this. All right. I'm going to use a particular exploit. I know one that will work on this remote box, so I'm going to do a search. By the way, notice how tab completion works. I have only parse search in there, but I hit tab and it knows to complete it. And also, the tab completion is somewhat context aware, so it knows if you're like looking for exploits, it knows it's only looking at exploits, depending on what options you've already chosen so far. And I'm going to look for net API. Okay, searching for my exploits. There we go. So which one of those do I want to use? Well, I think the 067 is the one I want to use. So what I'm going to do is say use Windows to tell the platform. Actually, let me pull up info. Info is the next thing I wanted to do. Info, and I'm going to say Windows SMB. I wonder if I did something wrong because it's not auto-completing for me.
Yeah, man, neither.
Oh well.
Good job, Adrian. You busted all the word over.
It happens. And now I have a bunch of information. It's more convenient to actually look at the information you saw before inside the web interface. But now I know a little bit about this particular exploit. Now I'm going to go ahead and say use exploit. I'm going to tell it what platform, in this case Windows. It could be Linux, for instance, or BSD, or a bunch of other platforms. But I'm going to use Windows, because this is a very Windows-specific vulnerability. SMB. If there's too many things for tab completion, it gives you a long list like that, which is not necessarily what I need at this particular point. Okay, luckily I put down the name here. Yeah, MS08 Net API. So I'm going to tell it to use that particular exploit. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set payload. I'm going to use set G because I might want to attack the same box with a few different exploits. So I'm going to use set G for set global. If I happen to screw up any of this stuff, I can use the back command, the unset, or the unset G commands to undo these particular settings that I've chosen. So now I'm going to choose payload, set G payload, and I'm going to choose the interpreter. Now I'm only going to briefly cover interpreter. I'm going to have other guys go into more details there. Interpreter is basically a shell you can get on the remote box. It has so many built-in options. It's really quite nifty. And I'm going to use reverse TCP so it disconnects back to me. Now after I've done that, I have to set up a few options. Now there's some stuff, I'm going to show options. These are options I may have to set. If you see something that says required, it means you absolutely have to set that for the exploit to work. You can also show advanced options. Things that you normally wouldn't have to set, but you can if you really wish to. Also, I can use an encoder at this point using, let's say, set encoder and for instance, let's say I wanted to use x86, which is my platform, and Shikariganai. I can go ahead and set that. I'm not going to use that option here, but just know it is an option if you're worried about AB bypass on the box you're about to hit. The settings I do have to make for this particular exploit, though, are both for the remote host. By the way, this part does not seem to be case sensitive. You can use lowercase r host. And I'm going to set this to 192.168.184.129. By the way, there's been plenty of time to play around with this, especially during lunch and so forth. So if it fails right now, don't worry about it. If you have any questions, raise your hands, and hopefully one of the other instructions can maybe help you out with it.
What was that? What's that netg do again?
Oh, netg. Netg does nothing because it's a typo.
Oh, okay.
setg.
Oh, thanks.
setg r host. Okay, that's my remote host. Now I'm going to tell a local host to connect back on. And I'm going to set my local host to 130. Assuming it will actually respond to me typing. Alright. Now, if that's actually everything I needed to do, I should be able to just go ahead and type in exploit.
Oh, I see.
Huh.
Was L-host required on that one?
The L-host was required, yes.
Sure.
Actually, I got it backwards. And this is why I am not necessarily a professional pen tester.
Oh.
I got those backwards. Or as I like to say it, back-asswards. Alright. Now let's see if that exploit works. It didn't actually... Sorry about this, guys. It's going to take me a second to actually see what I'm screwing up here. Alright, my remote host is 130. And my local host is 129. I show options so I actually see what is set. Always a good way to double check before you say connect. And for some reason, it's not actually resetting it when I do that. So let me do this. Unset G. And I guess this is a good place for me to actually be able to show you how to use unset G command. 192, that one's actually unset G and R host, and it's unset G L host. Now let's actually set those right. Remote host 130. Oh, by the way, I'm using up arrow to so I don't have to retype everything.
Looks like it'll let you reissue the command and it'll type over it or replace it. Yeah.
How come it's still keeping my old session? Do you all have any idea why that would be?
What's that?
I'm just going to set for the local one. For some reason, it's holding on to the bad settings I did earlier, and I have no idea why. Live demos are sometimes the bane of my existence. I'll just edit this all first. It's all good, right? Alright, now let's see. Let's show options. Let's see if it actually took those. Well, that time it actually seemed to take them. Why would resetting it not overwrite the old settings?
Set G does it globally. You're not going to see it on your initial show option setting.
Yeah, but I went ahead and did the unset G2 to get rid of the settings.
And then you have to then reset R host and L host after that. Just try not to make sure.
Alright. All that because I transposed two IP addresses. So definitely, listen to this, is use the show options before you tell it to exploit. I now have a interpreter session. Yay! All that battle to get that far. Alright, let's use a few simple commands. First of all, I can pull up help. Now mine is a little different. I have a bunch of different options here. Hash jump's always a popular one. Hash jump gives me the hashes. I can throw that into something like Kane or any popular cracker, let's say John the Ripper, and be able to crack the local passwords. Or I can use the hashes in some kind of pass-the-hash attack. If I want to find out more about the system I just connected to, sysinfo is useful. If you want to use that help, I highly recommend using help and looking through it. You can see where that more command would come in real handy right here. Alright, timestamp, by the way, you can actually change the access and modify times on any particular file. Are you all giggling at me back there?
No.
Alright, other things I want to show off while I was in here. I can type in shell and actually have the shell in the remote box. And that's my remote Windows box. I can type X to get back out of that shell. Once I have a shell, I can do all sorts of stuff. So basically, from this exploit, from this payload, you can sort of access the functionality of most of the other payloads. Let me go ahead and go background. Like, for instance, let's say I'm tired of messing around with this particular box. I can go back to MSFConsole and get out of interpreter if I wanted to by just typing background. So it backgrounds that particular session. If I want to reconnect, well, let me pull up help on sessions. So you can see all the options you can do with sessions. Alright, let me see what all sessions are there. Now, I was going to just use sessions-L, but I'll use sessions-L-V, you said it was? Dave.
What's that?
V for verbose to actually see which exploit it was.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you. And there, not only do we see what sessions I have active, but which exploit it was. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and connect to session 1, and I'm back in my interpreter. I can now get around and do things. I'm going to execute a few extra things. For instance, I can try executing what do I execute on? Typing it on. I had PS execute on the brain. -F notepad.exe. That's going to start off Notepad, but note that you're not actually going to see it on the remote box because it's running underneath the context of a different user. But if I was going into the process list, which I can do with just PS, you see Notepad is down here and actually running. This can be used for all sorts of things. I already showed hash dump. Let's say I want to clear the logs in that particular block. I mean, there's all sorts of commands built in. Clear EV. This is going to clear the event log. Although total wiping of it would definitely be an obvious attack, or it would be something obvious that somebody was there. So it's not exactly stealthy. And screenshot, which if you don't have the newest version, may not be in there. When you type screenshot, it actually does a capture of what was on the remote screen, which is nifty. I mean, interpreters are so powerful, and the best thing about Interpreter probably is the fact that you can extend it with your own scripts. Carlos Doc Operator Perez is probably the head guy as far as doing really whacked out interpreter scripts. But I'm going to use one right here called Scraper. And this one's going to take a little too long to run. But right now what it's doing in that remote box, it's grabbing hashes, registry keys, and so forth. Information might be useful for further penetrating the network. I mean, it's beyond just getting root on the box. It's also finding out information about that particular box that can be used to leverage it and attack other systems in the same network. But you see it's grabbing a whole bunch of stuff. And right now, if I'm going to open another command shell. If I was to change into .msf logs, I believe it was, Scraper. Oh, because I have two different ones that are very similar. Let me go into that one. There's a whole bunch of information I can now look at about that compromised host that may lead to compromising of other hosts. And that's pretty much all I had to show about the basics of using Metasploit to exploit a remote box. If you want to try this later on, I actually have some notes here on using a browser drive-by attack. Essentially, you start a web server on your box, and when someone connects to it, it does an exploit and has their box execute something. In this case, I wrote a little simple Autoit script that allows you to see someone's webcam. But it's not going to work in here because we don't have complete networking support. Not to mention, this one's a little trickier to actually get functioning. Is anybody going to be showing browser autocomb?
I use browser autocomb. We have a social engineering toolkit.
Oh, that's right. Screw the browser autocomb. All right, and that's what I have for you. So I guess we'll go ahead and call up Ken.